Hello, Annex community. Welcome to Jonah, day 2. I learned that we do have a name for these things, spiritual hikes. I don't get it, but that's what we're calling them. So, welcome to your spiritual hike for the day. I guess we're doing that. Today we're going to be going through Jonah 2 as a continuation of yesterday, the predictable installment that comes after Jonah 1. Before we start, do me a favor. Pause the video, go and read Jonah chapter 1 and Jonah chapter 2. By the end of the week, you're going to read a full book of the Bible. After you finish reading Jonah chapter 2, please pause and read Matthew 12, 38 through 42. Go do that. Welcome back. Here's where I want to start today. Yesterday we covered Jonah chapter 1 and we did a breakdown. Here's your quick summary in case you missed it. We are trying to figure out the theology behind Jonah of whether it is a historical story or whether it is a lineage, a mythology, a parable that is meant to teach us some sort of moral lesson. And then as the week goes on, I want us to ask the question, does it matter whether or not this is a historical story or not? Today, chapter 2 is going to be the chapter where a lot of people will make an argument that it is a historical story, which there's an irony, but that's why I had you guys read that verse in Matthew. So I actually want to start there. If we go to Matthew 12, verse 38, Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. But he answered them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks a sign, but no sign will be given to it except for the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights at the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment of this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. Pause there. I know that was only through 41. Jesus is talking to these Pharisees. They say, hey, we want a sign. He's already been performing miracles. He's already been healing people. He will continue to perform miracles and heal people. But there's this group of people that say, hey, prove to us that you are who you say you are. Prove to us in a sign that you're the Son of God. And Jesus says, the sign that you're going to get will be the sign of Jonah. I will do what Jonah did. I will go into the depths for 3 days and 3 nights, and then I will return. So there's some interesting literary stuff going on here, but that's our general gist. If we flip back to Jonah and we start paging through chapter 2, it starts off, And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah gets eaten by a whale. This is really the only mention that we have to the whale, but I felt that this was necessary. Thank you to my wonderful girlfriend Maddie for drawing a whale. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God at the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord. Out of my distress he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. Now, the word for some of your guys' translations, out of the belly of blank. Some translations say out of the belly of death, out of the belly of darkness. The word Sheol, closest thing that I can think of that I found online and kind of doing a little bit of research, it's afterlife. It's the space beyond our physical bodies, the spiritual realm, the place we go when we die. It's not a direct reference to heaven or hell, as far as I understand. It's a reference to that other realm. So he says, out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice, out of the belly of something after this life. Now, one of the theological approaches to Jonah, like we talked about, is that it is a mythology that's meant to represent our relationship and our calling from Jesus, and then what happens with that. man gets a calling from God to go do a certain thing, he doesn't want to do that certain thing, so instead he runs the other direction, and then there's this big correction. So Jonah is going his own way, and then there's this huge correction. Now, if we think about the narrative of what happens when Jesus comes, there's a really similar parallel. That Jonah's 3 days and Jonah's 3 nights in the belly could be a metaphor for the 3 days and the 3 nights that Jesus will then spend later on in the grave. And the fact that the word here is not out of the belly of the whale I cried, but out of the belly of afterlife, out of the belly of death. That, to me, I see a pretty cool parallel and a pretty cool and strong argument that this very well could be a narrative, a prediction of what Jesus is going to have to do, rather than a literal story. But people will make the argument that because in Matthew 12, Jesus references Jonah, and he says, the people of Nineveh will be the ones condemning you because they repented and you didn't. People will take that and say, well, Jesus spoke about it. Jesus uses Jonah as a very clear analogy, and they'll use that as leverage. The fact that Jesus spoke about it, that must mean that it actually did happen and it actually was historical. I'll let you decide for yourselves if that is an overwhelmingly compelling argument, or if it really matters. As we continue jumping through this, it's worth having a conversation of where did Jesus go when he died? So Jesus dies, he's on the cross. There are people who think that he went to heaven. There are people who think that he went to hell. There are people that think that he just did nothing for 3 days. That's a whole nother conversation. But as you read Jonah 2, I would love for you to read it in the sense of Jesus writing from the grave. I know that's a little bit weird, but picture Jesus either on the cross or during these 3 days writing in the despair and in the darkness of, for the first time, having been separated from God. You cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, at the flood, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and billows passed over me. And then I said, I am driven away from your sight. Yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. There's this essence that Jonah is writing from the belly of the whale. It says, I'm driven from your sight. I have been holistically separated from God. I am in the darkest and the deepest place that I could possibly be. And I think that at this point, it's actually necessary for us to pause and to go back to Matthew. This time we're going to be going to Matthew 27. So if you guys will page over that way with me. I should have bookmarked this. Matthew 27:46 is the verse that we're looking at. And what we have here is we have Jesus dying on the cross. We have Jesus who's been put up. He's about to pass away. And these are some of his last words. 46 says, and in the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lema, I don't speak Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And if you're willing to look at some of the other translations, the language ends up looking very similar to, my God, why have you turned away from me? Why have you turned your sight away from me? Theory is that when Jesus is on the cross, God cannot be in the presence of him because he has embodied the sin and taken on the sin. So Jesus is separated in that moment. And if you look at the verse and the phrasing that exists in Jonah, then I said, I am driven from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. Again, for me, I see this really compelling argument that there's a strong relationship between these two narratives. There's a strong relationship between what Jonah's talking about and Jesus's time during those 3 days of being dead. The waters closed in around me to take my life. The deep waters surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. Goes on, when my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and a prayer came to me into your holy temple. So Jonah is in the belly of the whale, and he deals with his sin. In some capacity, he says, all right, God, I'll do it. I'll do the thing that you asked me to do. I will go to Nineveh. Tomorrow we're going to break down why Jonah was so hesitant to go into Nineveh. But for now, I want you guys to look at Jonah chapter 2, think about the death of Jesus on the cross, and just kind of spend some time thinking and praying about that parallel, and thinking and praying about how those two stories go hand in hand. I think that this book is full of incredible poetry, and I will see you guys tomorrow.